Shall I tell you how delighted I am to be speaking with Lloyd Jackson? Lloyd, welcome home. Glad you come to Jamaica. But you come frequently, it would appear.
And you know, this is unusual. I was here last year, as in 2018, and then I came back in 2019. 2018 was a big year. I celebrated my 60th, and I thought I wanted to come back to Jamaica and have that party. And so, but normally I'm not here that often. I'd come back maybe once every 3 years, or sometimes every 4 years, depending on where I'm working and how much time.
Well, the Lord sent you back now so I could get to talk to you and hear your story.
Right. But you know, I need to tell you though that I talk about people I've admired, and even before we talk about the GIS days, you were one of those persons. And I always said, you know, if someone like Faye can achieve the way you have, coming from Clarendon as I did, in a quiet way, I always looked up and admire what you were doing, and your peers and colleagues, as you were all at GIS. We were all at GIS back in those days. I just wanted you to know that.
Thank you,
always
Lloyd.
admired you.
Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you.
Your mom, so she left when you were 2, went to England.
Yeah.
When next did you see her?
So as I said, my mom, I'm the only one from my mom and my dad. After me, they separated. They each got remarried. My mother went to England, and she remarried, and she too had 10 additional kids with myself. My father, he remarried, and he stayed in Jamaica and had an additional 10 kids as well.
So that's 21
So that's
total,
21. So that's
Whoa.
21. I kind of feel like somebody in the middle, because half of them in England, half of them in Jamaica. I kind of grew up when I left home, when I left my dad alone. But my mom, you know, 1983 was a really interesting year for me. That was the year my grandmother died. That was the year that my father died. That was the year that I moved to the United States. And that was the year that I saw my mom after 22 years, when she came back from my grandmother's funeral. That was the time I saw my mother. But she was always in my life. I mean, we were in touch. She would send the parcels. I remember a picture that we have that is so dear to us. We all got dressed up in the outfits that she sent and went down to Trapperton to see the photographer. And it's one of the few pictures of my early childhood that I have. So she was in my life, but it was 22 years later.
What was that reunion
like
that day?
You know, I was living in Kingston, and there was a knock at the door, and my sister Mary was with her. And the moment I opened the door, I recognized that it was my mother. The sad thing about it is that at first she wasn't sure she was going to make the funeral, and she arrived the day after the funeral. She was totally devastated. But we got a chance and we bonded, and after that I would visit her frequently in England before she passed a couple of years ago. But it was, it was great seeing her, and I knew we had a lot of journey and a lot of makeup, if you will, to do.
But you did it.
But we did it, yeah, we did it.
So you came from Brandon Hill, you came to Kingston to live with your father and his wife, your stepmother, who you've told me she's like an angel.
She is.
So what was school like for you when you got to Kingston?
You know, the interesting thing is, so I came to Kingston when I was 12, I believe 11 or 12 or somewhere there. And I didn't take common entrance. And the reason I didn't take common entrance was my grandmother didn't know how to apply for a birth certificate, if you can imagine that.
Yeah.
And so she didn't. And so I missed out on taking common entrance. And I went to St. Andrew Technical for evening classes. And you talk about people who are strong influences in your life. Another is Mrs. Inez Morrison. She was someone who took me in, and she would give me private lessons in the evenings after I worked at JIS back then.
Hang on, just a moment. Let me settle something. I know one Inez Morrison. I know
her.
there may be many Inez Morrisons.
I bet you it's
but
her.
Is this the mother of the president of the
her.
Court of Appeal, Dennis
her.
Morrison?
Mrs. Morrison. Mrs. Morrison. I just visited her. When I came. I always go and see her, and I know
So what is it that she saw about you?
You know, so we were all at GIS back in those days, and Patrona Morrison was working
artist,
there. Exactly,
yes.
was working there. And through her, I got to know the extended
Don't
family.
carry me to GIS yet, though. Don't carry me to
But yeah.
Stay at St. Andrew Tech
Oh,
for
is that
the
right?
time
St. Andrew
being.
Tech.
Yes.
So the evening classes with Mrs. Morrison, so I could take JSC, and I
The Jamaica
did
School
JSC.
Certificate.
And then after JSC, it was GC. But all of those were evening classes at Stats for a while, and then evening classes, more so and more profoundly and more enriching that I had with Mrs. Morrison.
So you mean you went to her home?
I went to her home. She was in Barbican. I went to her home every evening. She was very patient. What I think there's a Keats, the poet, Ode to a Nightingale. We are doing English lit, and up until this day, I remember that poem, Ode to a Nightingale. And I took GC, JC, and yeah, that was kind of like the beginning. And I lived on Maxwell Avenue with my family.
With your family. But then again, you got to the point where you think you turned big man and you decided to left the family.
No, you know, it wasn't quite like that. For some reason, my dad and it might have been that letter. And it just wasn't kicking off. It just wasn't happening. I go to church twice on Sundays, a couple of times during the week. It just wasn't happening. My stepmother, you know, all this while I remember I mentioned that she would take my salary when I earned it.
When you started to work, right?
One day she said to me, she said, son, I was 19, 20 maybe. She said, son, I think it's time for you to go. You and your father just not making it. Here's the money that I have saved up for you. Buy a bed, buy a dressing table, and let's go find a room for you. And that's what happened. And she said, and I don't know how she knew, she said, you know, nothing is going to happen to you. You're going to be successful. You're going to make it. Do not have any fear. You will be all right.
That's your stepmom?
That's my stepmom. And that's how I left home. And I was confused. I was perplexed at that time. And I've been meaning to ask her, how did she know that? But she was absolutely right.
Discernment.
Yeah, it was.
Wisdom.
Had to have been.
Yeah.
She's a wise woman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was your first job?
So, you know, my first job, Daily News, was that newspaper that used to be
Halfway Tree
Road. And I recall my first job as working with JS. My stepmother said, no, son, your first job was at that bottle depot. You know, back in the days, you used to take the empty bottles and you would exchange that. And she said, that's your first job. You would get the crates, you would clean up the bottles, you would stack them together. And that was my first job right there on Halfway Tree Road. And that's how it started.
And then after that?
And then after that, there's another little place on Chelsea Avenue. They had a billiards room or something. And I'd be there cleaning tables, giving change. And I remember back in those days, I always thought, you know, this is where I am today. But it's not going to be where I ended up.
And this is where we're going to take a break, but it's not where we'll end. My guest is Lloyd Jackson. When we come back, we'll find out about JIS, because he's mentioned that at least twice. Yeah, we'll find out about JIS, the Jamaica Information Service, and how that really moved him in life. This is Profile. Thank you for watching.